Sir, Mr. Washington, according to our records, you've been deceased for 6 months. The woman on the other end of the line said it like she was reading off a grocery list. Her voice was flat, mechanical, like she'd repeated the same script 100 times that day. I thought I'd heard her wrong. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear and asked her to repeat herself. Your file shows you passed away 6 months ago, sir. The claim was processed and closed. 6 months ago, I was still out front trimming the hedges around my porch. 6 months ago, I was paying my property taxes on time, writing donation checks to the AIM Church, where my late wife Lorraine and I used to sit in the third pew from the back. 6 months ago, I was still driving my old Chevy down to the shoreline every evening, casting a fishing line into the cold Michigan water and watching the sun drop behind the trees. But her voice didn't waver. She said my pension file, my insurance claim, and a stack of legal documents under my name had already been fully processed and paid out. I've lived for more than 65 years. I once thought the scariest thing was dying alone in a house too big for one man. Maybe I was wrong. What's far more terrifying is when someone slips into your life, takes your name, and starts living it while you're still sitting there breathing. One slow breath at a time. I'm telling you this story because maybe somewhere out there you trusted the wrong person too, just like I did. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you right now? Sitting in your living room? Parked in your driveway? Lying in bed after everyone else has gone to sleep? Drop me a comment and let me know. If this story speaks to you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me until the end. You'll want to see how this ends. My name is Jerome Washington. I'm 65 years old. I've been a widower for 4 years. I live alone in a small brick house near the shoreline in Ypsilanti, Michigan, just outside Detroit. The winters here are long and brutal, the kind of cold that seeps through your jacket and settles deep in your bones. I worked as an electrical technician for 33 years, retired right on schedule. I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable. From the outside, my life looks simple. And maybe that simplicity is exactly what made me careless. The call I got earlier came from the pension fund I'd been paying into for 3 decades. A place so familiar, I could recite my policy number by heart. I'd called them just to ask about a routine interest rate adjustment. A small thing, almost automatic. But instead of the usual response, I got that sentence. The woman explained that my beneficiary had completed the payout procedure 6 months prior. She asked why I was still calling if the file had already been closed. I gave a strained laugh, thinking there'd been some kind of mistake. I stated my name, read out my social security number, answered the security questions she threw at me. There was a pause on the line, a few seconds of silence. Then her voice became sharper, colder. The system won't allow identity verification for you, sir. A deceased individual cannot complete direct verification. I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen table. My hand shook just slightly. Not enough to spill it. Just enough to make the surface ripple. I asked where those documents had come from. She said there was a valid death certificate on file. Confirmed signatures. Proper stamps. Everything was in order. I didn't argue over the phone. Not because I believed her, but because I knew I needed to see it with my own eyes. I pulled on my coat, grabbed my cap, and stepped outside. The cold morning air hit me hard and cleared my head. My old Chevy started after the second turn of the key, same as always. On the drive to the company's local office, my mind wasn't empty. It was full of scattered images. Quiet evenings by the water. Times I signed papers without reading every line. Casual comments from family members I'd brushed off as jokes. They didn't form a clear picture yet, but they sat heavy in my chest. The office was in a low brick building near 8 Mile Road. The sign out front was faded from years of snow and wind. A young employee greeted me at the front desk. She was polite but uneasy, glancing from the screen to my face, like she couldn't quite reconcile the two. After a few minutes of internal discussion with her supervisor, she printed out a stack of papers and placed them in front of me. A death certificate bearing my name, Jerome Elijah Washington. Date of birth, address, everything correct. The signature at the bottom looked exactly like mine. Not vaguely similar. Close enough that even I would have nodded in agreement at first glance. The employee said quietly that the file had been submitted more than 6 months ago. No disputes. No complaints. Everything had gone through smoothly enough that no one had questioned it. The sole beneficiary was clearly listed on the next page. Marcus Reed. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Marcus was Loren's son from her first marriage. I met him when he was 18. Tall, skinny, always looking down at his shoes when he talked. I helped him with college tuition, let him stay with us when he first dropped out, co-signed for his first apartment. I never once thought about the word inheritance when it came to Marcus. I only thought I was doing the right thing. Sitting in front of that stack of papers, I didn't slam the desk. I didn't raise my voice. I just felt a hollow open beneath my feet, like someone had dug a pit long ago, and I'd finally stepped into it. I left the office when the sky had turned gray. Snow drifted lightly. I didn't drive right away. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes, watching my breath fog up the windshield. In my mind, only one question remained. Simple, unbearably heavy. Who buried me alive in my own life? When I got home, the living room lights were still off. I hung my coat on the hook by the door, set my keys on the wooden shelf. Everything was where it always had been, as if nothing had changed. But after a few steps, I stopped. The grandfather clock in the hallway was still running. I hadn't touched it since Lorraine died. Yet the hour hand and minute hand were exactly 6 months behind. I stood there for a long time without turning on the light. The faint glow from the porch was just enough to see the pendulum swinging back and forth, as if it knew more than I did about what had happened. 6 months. No more, no less. I reached out and touched the cold wood lightly, then pulled my hand back. Some things, once they've gone off course, can't simply be reset. I sat down in the chair Lorraine used to read in at night. The cushion dipped slightly where her back once rested. The smell of old fabric mixed with her favorite lavender soap triggered memories without warning. Lorraine brought Marcus home on a rainy afternoon in early spring. He was 18, hair dripping wet, an old duffel bag slung over one shoulder. She stood in the doorway with her hand on his back and said to me in a light voice, as if she'd rehearsed it, "He'll be staying with us for a while." I looked at Marcus, thin, awkward, avoiding my eyes. I didn't ask many questions. Lorraine rarely asked for anything, and when she did, I usually said yes. In the early days, Marcus barely existed in the house. He went to community college, worked part-time at a gas station, came home late, ate quickly, and went upstairs. I noticed details more than words. Worn-down sneakers. An old car that kept breaking down. Overdue bills piling up in the kitchen drawer he forgot to hide. I wasn't his biological father, but I was used to handling the things no one else wanted to touch. I paid his tuition when the financial aid fell short. I fixed his car twice in the same month. I called creditors and talked long enough to get them to agree to extensions. Marcus started calling me Pops after I wrote a check to cover his remaining tuition balance. He said it naturally, without hesitation. Lorraine smiled when she heard it. I didn't correct him. Some titles, once spoken, come with responsibility whether you ask for it or not. There was a time when Marcus got into deeper trouble. A personal loan in his name, high interest, short term, Lorraine paced the kitchen. Marcus sat at the table, head down, hands clasped. I pulled out my paperwork and co-signed without reading every line. I remember thinking only this: the boy needed an adult to step in, and I was the only one in that house who could do it. Even now, I still wonder. Was that help? Was that love? Or was I taking away his chance to grow up? People say parents must sacrifice everything. Others say loving someone means letting them take responsibility. What do you think? Have you ever helped your children or grandchildren out of love, only to realize later that you did it the wrong way? Share your thoughts in the comments and let me know I'm not alone. Life went on in what I called a steady way. Lorraine died from a stroke so fast no one had time to prepare. Marcus cried at the funeral more than I did. I never knew whether it was real grief or a reflex learned from moments that required tears. After the funeral, he stayed for a while, then moved out, saying he wanted independence. I supported him. I even helped with the security deposit on a small apartment near downtown Detroit. We still saw each other. Not often, but enough that I never felt left behind. Marcus stopped by on holidays, ate dinner, told small stories about work. Sometimes he called just to ask how I was doing. Those calls often ended with a joke. Once he laughed and said, "If you die, Pops, I won't have to worry about retirement money." I laughed along. A short, raspy laugh, the way older people respond to things they don't want to think about too deeply. I remember patting his shoulder and telling him I wasn't going anywhere. Now that sentence came back to me. So clear I could almost hear his laugh echoing in this kitchen. The next morning, I went back to the pension office. Not to argue, but to ask more specific questions. A different employee saw me this time. Older, more cautious. I asked who had submitted the death certificate. She checked the screen, typed a few lines, then looked up. The name wasn't long or complicated. Marcus Reed. I didn't react right away. I didn't slam the desk. I didn't ask why. I simply nodded, as if this was information I had been destined to hear. She explained the process. The certificate had been properly filed. The confirming signature matched previous co-signature records. The beneficiary was clearly listed. Everything had passed through the required checks. I drove home in silence. The road along the water was coated with thin ice. I slowed down, gripping the steering wheel. Old images lined up in my mind without being called. Marcus at 18 in the doorway. Marcus holding keys to his first apartment, saying, "Thanks, Pops." Marcus sitting across from me, watching my pen as I signed papers. I went into my small office. The bottom drawer was still locked. I opened it and pulled out the old files. Copies of co-signed documents. My signature neatly placed at the bottom. That signature, next to the one on the death certificate, was nearly indistinguishable. I had never been careful with paperwork. I always believed trust mattered more. That afternoon, Marcus called. His voice was the same, warm, a little rushed. He asked how I was, said he'd been busy lately. I answered briefly and didn't mention the morning. He said he'd stop by over the weekend. I agreed. After I hung up, I stared at the empty space in front of me. There was no sudden burst of anger, just a slow, spreading cold in my chest, as if I had discovered that something had been growing inside my home all along. Eating at my table, calling me by a name I never asked for. For the first time in my life, I didn't ask what Marcus had done. I asked what I had done to let things get here. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear, but because the house was too quiet. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the refrigerator cycle on and off, the wind brushing lightly against the north-facing window. I walked into Loren's old bedroom and pulled open the lower left drawer. The safe key was exactly where she always kept it, in a small wooden box lined with worn velvet. I hadn't opened that safe since she died, not out of respect for privacy, but because I believed there was nothing left to know. The safe opened with a dry click. Inside were familiar things: insurance certificates, old savings books, faded photographs. I flipped through them slowly. At the bottom was a thick brown envelope, sealed, unlabeled. When I pulled it out, the paper scraped my hand like dry sand. Inside was a neatly organized stack of documents, ordered too carefully to be accidental. A power of attorney, open-ended, broad in scope. My name printed clearly at the top. The signature at the bottom slanted just as mine always was, pressure placed exactly where I placed it. If set beside my checkbook signature, the difference was almost non-existent. I stared long enough to feel a chill run down my spine. Some things, when they are that similar, are no longer coincidence. The next morning, I brought the papers to Patterson's law office on the east side. The room hadn't changed. Small, smelling of old paper and forgotten coffee. He put on his glasses and flipped through the pages slowly, without asking me anything. When he set them down, he spoke in the voice of someone used to delivering news no one wants to hear. Formally speaking, the signature is valid. I didn't ask more. I looked at the desk lamp, casting light over the paper where that familiar slant rested. As if I had signed it myself the day before, Patterson looked up, hesitating for a moment. At a glance, there's nothing to dispute. To go further, you'd need a forensic examination. I nodded and gathered the papers. That was enough. On the drive home, I didn't stop by the water like I usually did. I drove straight back. As I turned into the driveway, a small rental truck was parked by the porch. The back door stood open. 2 men were carrying Loren's wooden cabinet, the one where she kept tablecloths and old photo albums. I hit the brakes hard. "What are you doing here?" I asked. One of them looked at me, still holding the cabinet. "Clearing items." "Owner's request." Owner. The word landed quickly and cleanly, as if it had been rehearsed. I went inside. The living room felt emptier than usual. Loren's armchair was gone from the window corner. The grandfather clock stood silent, its batteries removed. On the dining table, several stacks of papers lay neatly arranged. Furniture sale agreements, receipts, a list of items to be moved this week. Marcus stood in the kitchen on the phone. When he saw me, he ended the call, calm. "I thought you'd be home later," he said. I asked about the truck. "Marcus didn't dodge it. I'm clearing things out. The house is too big. No point keeping all of it." I placed Patterson's papers on the table. I didn't slide them toward him. I just set them down. Marcus glanced at them and knew immediately. No panic. Just a short exhale. "You went to a lawyer?" He asked. "Since when?" I said. Marcus leaned against the sink, arms crossed. "A long time before Mom died." He went on like he was presenting an approved plan. Old debts, risks, the future. He used the same words I had once used when advising him at 20. Outside. One of the movers called out, "Is there a small cabinet in the bedroom too?" Marcus turned and answered, "Yes, take everything." I walked toward the hallway. The bedroom door was open. Loren's vanity had been stripped of its drawers. I stood in the doorway, my hand gripping the frame tighter than necessary. "When did you learn my signature?" I asked without turning around. "Every time you wrote a check," Marcus said. "Every time you left papers on the table." He paused. I just watched. The word watch dropped into the room. Light, sharp. I remembered evenings under warm light. The checkbook open, me signing a scrap of paper to show him. Back then, I thought I was teaching. I didn't know I was leaving data behind. That afternoon, the bank letter arrived. Thick envelope, clean, polite. I opened it on the porch. Remortgage notice. My name listed as borrower. The amount large enough to leave no doubt. The signature at the end slanted firm. I carried the envelope inside just as the truck returned. This time they were carrying Loren's armchair. I rushed forward and put my hand on the side of it, stopping them. Stop. I snapped. The men froze and looked toward Marcus, who stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching me like a man dealing with an inconvenience. Take your hand off, Marcus said evenly. This house is in my name. Everything in it is mine to handle. This is your mother's chair, I said, my voice starting to shake with anger. She's gone, he replied flatly. And you don't have the right to stop the homeowner from clearing their property. Don't make me call the police for causing a disturbance. I stood there, rooted to the floor. My hand was still gripping the arm of the chair, but the strength had already drained by half. Police, the law, ownership. Those words rose up like a glass wall in front of me. I could see everything, but I couldn't touch it. I realized I could struggle here, but I would lose. I needed to know exactly what kind of rights he was holding. I let go of the chair. The two men immediately carried it past me and loaded it into the truck. I turned my back, walked quickly to my car, and started the engine. I wasn't running away. I was going to look for my weapon. I drove to the bank through light sleet. The clerk checked the records faster than I expected. She said in a neutral voice, "The loan is valid. Signed under power of attorney." I asked about the house. She looked at the screen again, then said slowly, "You no longer have legal rights here." When I returned, the driveway was empty. The truck was gone. The house stood there as it always had. The roof, the door, the porch. But inside, something warm had been taken out. I sat in the car for a long time, my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the front door. Nothing had changed, except the name on it was no longer mine. I stepped into the living room and looked around. The things I had chosen, fixed, paid for were still there, unchanged. But my place in that space was different. I moved slowly, running my hand along the back of the chair, the edge of the table, the windowsill. Nothing had changed, and that was what unsettled me most. In the corner of the room, Loren's metal box sat under the low cabinet, the one I had never opened. I had left it there as a silent marker, thinking some things should be left alone. Today, I pulled it out. Cold metal, heavy. The lid was secured with a simple latch. I opened it. Inside were a few envelopes, a small notebook, and a letter placed on top. My name written in Loren's handwriting. I sat down holding the letter. Thin paper, slightly yellowed. I opened it and read. Lorraine wrote plainly. No circling around. She wrote about Marcus. Not an accusation, but with the caution of someone who had watched for a long time. She mentioned the times Marcus asked about documents, about signatures, about accounts. She wrote that she had suggested I revoke the old authorization, that she had told me I should keep a few boundaries. You trust too easily, she wrote, and you think kindness will protect itself. I folded the letter and set it on the table. None of it surprised me. It made me remember evenings when Lorraine stood in the kitchen, started a sentence, then stopped. Times she lingered longer than usual over the papers on the table. I had heard her. I just hadn't chosen to act. That afternoon, Marcus called. I let the phone ring a few times before answering. He spoke quickly, as if he assumed I already knew. I'll come by to talk, he said. I didn't object. Marcus arrived after dark. He walked in, looked around, then looked at me. I placed Loren's letter on the table without saying a word. Marcus read it, his expression barely changing. Mom worried too much, he said. I handed him the bank documents. He skimmed them, then set them down. "I did everything legally," he said. "You're not losing anything." I asked him about the loan. He explained with prepared words: investment, cash flow, optimization. I asked about ownership. He said it was to protect the assets. I didn't argue. I asked one question: "Did you tell me?" Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You wouldn't have agreed." I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the water was dark, the wind stronger now. I thought of Loren's letter, of the word boundaries. I turned back and said slowly, "This house no longer has my name on it, but I'm still here." Marcus looked at me as if weighing something. He nodded, said he would send the repayment schedule, said everything would be fine. When he left, I locked the door. I stayed in the living room and turned on a small lamp. The metal box was still open. I put Loren's letter back inside, closed the lid, but didn't lock it. On the table, the bank papers lay side by side, neatly aligned. I looked at them for a while, then put them away in a drawer. Night fell, and the house grew quiet. I didn't feel thrown out. I felt set aside. There's a difference, and that difference was enough to make me stand a little straighter. I went to see Charlene in the late afternoon, when the sun had dipped low and the city light had begun to change. Her apartment was on the third floor of an old building near the Detroit River. I parked under a bare oak tree and sat for a moment before going up. Not because I was afraid. I just wanted to arrive with a clear enough head not to turn the meeting into an interrogation. Charlene opened the door after a few knocks. She looked thinner than the last time I saw her hair neatly tied back, a simple gray sweater. She looked at me, then stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was clean, sparsely furnished. A small wooden table, an old sofa, a bookshelf against the wall. No family photos on the walls. I noticed that right away and didn't ask. We sat facing each other. I set my cap on the table, still holding my keys. Charlene poured tea and slid the cup toward me. She didn't look directly at me. Her eyes kept landing on the edge of the table, on her sleeve, anywhere but my face. I spoke first, briefly, explaining what had happened. The paperwork, the bank, the house. I didn't embellish. I didn't use heavy words. I just stated the facts. Charlene listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said she knew some of it. Marcus had mentioned sorting out paperwork for me, said it was to keep things tidy. Charlene hadn't asked more. "I thought you were fine," she said. "You're always fine." I asked if she knew about the loan. Charlene shook her head. I asked about the old power of attorney. She shrugged, said that was complicated, involved the law. I didn't argue. I asked something else. "Can you help me?" Charlene looked at me then. Her gaze was steady, not avoiding mine. "I don't want to be involved in your money matters," she said. The words landed on the table. Light but final. There was no anger in them, just a boundary. I nodded. I didn't try to persuade her. I didn't say more. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Charlene asked if I had eaten dinner. I said I wasn't hungry. She nodded and stood up to clear the cups. When I got up to leave, she hugged me. A brief, polite hug. "I hope you're okay," she said. I walked down the stairs slowly. Outside, the wind was colder. I sat in the car and looked up at her apartment window. The light was on. I didn't feel rejected. I felt not chosen. And that was different from before. On the drive home, I remembered when Charlene was younger. Mornings driving her to school, afternoons when I came home late. I remembered thinking that providing was enough. I had been present, but not always there. The feeling came quickly, then passed. I didn't hold on to it. I let it move through me. When I got home, I opened the door and turned on the living room light. Loren's metal box was still in the corner, the lid unlocked. I didn't touch it. I hung up my coat and cap. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus reminding me about the repayment schedule. I read it and didn't reply. I sat at the kitchen table and opened an old notebook. I wrote a few lines. The time, the names. What had happened. Not to complain. To remember. I wrote down Charlene's words exactly. Then I closed the notebook. That night, I went to bed late. Not because I was worried. Because I was rearranging the order of things in my head. There were people who didn't stand with me. There were people who didn't stand against me. And there were things that, if they were going to be done, I would have to do myself when I turned off the light. The house was quiet as always, but my place in it was clearer. That night, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't call anyone. After washing the teacup that had gone cold long ago, I returned to the living room and pulled Laurent's metal box out to the middle of the floor. The ceiling light reflected faintly off the scratched metal surface. Scratches I remembered making when I cleaned the house after the funeral, when everything felt rushed and I just wanted to finish. I sat down and placed the box in front of me. Last time I had opened it and closed it again, as if touching the truth too long might break it. This time I opened it slowly. There was no sound. The lid lifted easily without resistance. Inside was more than handwritten letters. Beneath the envelopes was a stack of documents neatly arranged in a clear plastic sleeve. I took them out and placed them on the table. Pages from banks, from an insurance company, from an investment account I had never held. In the top corner of each page, Lorraine had marked small, consistent symbols in blue ink. I turned the pages and read. The dates stretched back years, not just recent months. Small transactions at first, then larger ones. Marcus's name appeared in many places, sometimes as recipient, sometimes as representative. I stood up to get my glasses. When I returned, I read more carefully. There were transfers that moved out, and then back again, looping through intermediary accounts. Withdrawals timed close to Marcus's loan payments. Copies of contracts. Not ones I had signed, but agreements executed under power of attorney. In the margins, Lorraine had written short notes. Check again. Don't tell Jerome. Not certain yet. At the bottom of the box, I found a small notebook. The cover was worn, the spine frayed. Inside was Lorraine's handwriting. Steady and regular. Not a diary. Records, dates, events, phrases. She had written down conversations between me and Marcus. Things I didn't remember saying. One line read. Marcus asked about the signature again. Another. Jerome trusts. I sat back down, the notebook resting on my lap. The feeling in my chest didn't crash over me like a wave. It came slowly, heavy, like falling snow. Lorraine had suspected for a long time. Not emotionally. Through observation. She hadn't told me. Not because she didn't think I could handle it, but because she feared I would collapse right then. Feared I wouldn't be able to separate a son from the truth. Some people don't leave assets. They leave the truth. That sentence wasn't Loren's. It came to me like a space being filled. I understood why she chose silence. I also understood the cost of it. I put the documents back in order. I wasn't in a hurry. I photographed each page with my phone, saved them in a separate folder, labeled by date. I placed the originals back in the box. This time, I locked the lid. Not to hide them, to protect them. The next morning, I drove to the public library in Ann Arbor, not to read the newspaper. I needed a computer, a printer, and quiet. I logged into my accounts, the ones that still allowed access. I checked histories, matched them against Lorraine's notes. There were gaps. There were overlaps. I printed the necessary pages, marked them in pencil, not ink. I called a local law office, the one that had confirmed the signature as formally valid. I made an appointment. I didn't say much over the phone. On the way home, I stopped by the water. The wind was strong. The surface rippled. I stood there for a few minutes looking out. I didn't think about Marcus. I thought about Lorraine, about evenings when she sat quietly reading while I watched television, about the times she asked if I was tired, then let it go. She had protected me in the quietest way, by not pulling me out of the world, but letting me stay in it until I could stand on my own. I went home, opened the door, hung up my coat. The house still didn't carry my name on paper, but some things inside it had shifted. I opened my notebook and wrote a few more lines. Not feelings, tasks. I wrote the lawyer's name, the date and time, the list of documents. I wrote one short sentence: do not run. That afternoon, Marcus called. I listened without interrupting. He talked about the repayment schedule, about upcoming plans. I asked one question. How many times have you used my power of attorney? There was a pause on the other end. Then he gave a number. I didn't react. I only said, I'll be working with a lawyer. That evening, I cooked for myself. Something simple. I ate slowly, cleaned up. I placed the metal box on the high shelf in my study, locked it, and put the key in a drawer. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark for a moment. Not to fall apart. To get used to the fact that I was no longer standing outside my own story. When I went to bed, I didn't think about leaving. I thought about staying. Staying long enough to make everything clear. This wasn't the time to run. This was the time to begin. I didn't change my routine right away. I still woke early, made coffee, opened the window to look out over the water, as always. The difference was in the things I deliberately slowed down. I called Marcus to fix the sagging kitchen shelf, to take out the trash, to schedule furnace maintenance. Things I used to do myself, I now left undone. I let him see me hesitating over familiar tasks, as if my hands no longer worked the way they used to. Marcus came more quickly than before. He walked into the house with the air of someone who owned it. Not the house, but the situation. Why? He looked at me, looked around, then sighed. You should rest more, he said. I nodded. I let him fix the shelf. Let him make decisions. Let him arrange things. I didn't comment. I didn't object. Gradually, his tone changed. Not louder, not sharper. Just shorter sentences, longer sighs. Once, when I dropped a plastic cup on the floor, Marcus said quietly but clearly enough, "Useless old man." The words passed like a comment on the weather. I didn't react. I bent down to pick up the cup, my hands shaking just enough to look real. That evening, I slipped my phone into my shirt pocket and turned on the recorder before Marcus returned to the living room. I didn't look at the screen. I just listened. He talked about moving my bedroom downstairs, about how I shouldn't handle paperwork anymore. He used the word safe often. I asked one question. What rights do I still have in this house? He answered immediately. The right to peace. I stopped recording when he left. I didn't listen to it. I saved the file, named it by date, and placed it in the folder I had prepared. I continued to play the part of someone who didn't know. I asked naive questions and let him explain. I nodded. I let him believe everything was following the old trajectory, that I had accepted my new place. 2 days later, I drove out of town, heading south, where the road narrowed and signs grew sparse. I went to the office of an independent lawyer in Toledo, someone who didn't know Marcus, had no ties to the local bank. The office was small. Old glass door. The smell of paper and coffee. He listened as I explained, reviewed the documents, looked at the photos. He didn't speak much. He asked a few precise questions and took brief notes. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he said slowly, "You have one move." I didn't ask more. I stood up, shook his hand, and set a return date. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I drove steadily, kept my distance. When I reached the house, I hung up my coat, set the keys where they belonged. I made coffee and sat watching the water grow darker. Marcus texted to ask if I needed anything. I replied, "No, I'm fine." I set the phone face down. In the silence, I practiced strategic silence. Not to endure, but to wait for the right moment. I didn't tell Marcus about the appointment that day. I didn't bring anything with me, except a thin folder of papers and a phone powered off. The Wayne County Sheriff's Office was more than 30 minutes from my house, on the other side of the old bridge near Dearborn. I arrived early and sat in the car for a few minutes before going in. Inside, it was quiet, evenly lit with white lights, the familiar smell of paper and cleaning solution. The duty officer listened as I explained without interrupting. I spoke slowly, without excess emotion. I handed over documents, copies, photos of signatures. I signed the identity fraud complaint. My name appeared on both lines. Victim and reporting party. I requested an independent signature examination. Not to complain. To set the legal clock to the right rhythm. From there, things moved faster than I expected. The bank contacted me, confirming a temporary freeze on the relevant accounts while awaiting the examination results. An email came, then a phone call. I answered briefly, to the point. I didn't add a story. I simply confirmed Marcus showed up at the house that afternoon. He walked into the living room with a folder in his hand, his face tight. "What did you do?" he asked. I sat in the chair, my hands resting on the armrests. I said I had filed a report. I said I had requested a signature examination. I said everything was being handled. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. The sound was sharp, making the small lamp tremble. He spoke quickly, louder than usual, asking if I understood what I was doing. I didn't stand up. I looked straight at him. I said I understood enough not to step back. In that moment, my hands shook. Not much, just enough for me to feel it. I placed my other hand on my thigh and kept my breathing steady. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I let him finish talking, then said one sentence. "I've waited long enough." Marcus went quiet for a beat. Then he turned away and walked quickly out the door. The door closed hard. I stayed seated, the house silent. I didn't move right away. I let the trembling pass. Then I stood, got some water, and took a small sip. In the days that followed, the neighbors began to notice. A bank vehicle parked in front of the house. A stranger asked questions. I said hello and didn't say much. News traveled fast in a small neighborhood. I still took my morning walks, still nodded in greeting. The looks were different. I didn't avoid them. The examination results hadn't arrived yet, but the battle was already out in the open. I knew from that moment there was no way back, and I wasn't looking for one. Marcus came close to 10 p.m. when the wind off the water was strong enough to make the window frames tremble slightly. I was in the living room, only half the lights on, the television off. I heard tires screech sharply outside, not the way he usually parked. The door opened hard enough to make the coat hook sway. He walked in without looking at me at first. His eyes swept quickly around the room, as if checking for something no longer where it should be. Then he turned and stood in the middle of the room, gripping a stack of papers. I recognized the bank logo in the corner of the top page. "What did you do?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it was rigid, tightly controlled. I didn't stand. I placed both hands on the armrests of the chair and kept my back straight. "I did what needed to be done," I said. Marcus let out a short laugh, one with no humor in it. He threw the papers onto the table. They slid apart, messy. "My accounts are frozen," he said. "The bank called. The police called. How do you think this is going to end?" I looked at the papers, then at him. I didn't answer that question. Marcus stepped closer. The distance between us narrowed. "You're destroying everything," he said. "I had it all arranged. You just needed to sit still." I stood up. Not fast, not slow. "Sitting still is how I was erased from my own life," I said. He slammed his hand on the table again, harder this time. The desk lamp shook, the light wobbling for a moment. "You're old," he said. "You don't understand. I'm saving you." I walked toward the window and looked out at the water. The surface was dark, the wind breaking it into layers. "Saving?" I repeated. I turned back and looked straight at him. "Saving who?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He breathed hard, then said quickly, "You have to leave this house tonight." The words landed without warning. "No negotiation." I asked, "Why?" "Because you no longer have the right to be here," he said. "And because I won't let you keep making things worse." I walked toward the stairs, intending to go up to the bedroom. Marcus blocked me, standing across the first step. "No," he said. "Just take your personal things. The rest I'll handle." I looked at him. For a very brief moment, I saw the face of the 19-year-old who once stood in the garage, hands stained with grease, asking me how to fill out a job application. The moment passed quickly. In front of me was someone else, the one guarding the door. "What are you doing?" I asked, not angry, not afraid. Just asking. Marcus didn't dodge it. "I'm ending this." I went back to the living room and took my coat from the hook. I bent down to pick up my wallet and phone. I walked slowly, slow enough to see everything. The chair Lorraine used to sit in. The old photo on the shelf. The scratch on the wooden floor. I stopped at the door. "I'll be back," I said. Marcus stood still. No, the door closed behind me. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a dry, final shut. Outside, cold wind cut across my face. I stood still for a few seconds, as if to be sure I was still breathing. Then I walked toward the car. I didn't turn on the house lights. I didn't look back. That night, I slept in the car. The driver's seat fully reclined, my coat rolled up as a pillow, the wind rocking the car, waves hitting the shore in a steady rhythm. I cracked the window slightly to let air in. Cold, but enough to stay awake. At times I closed my eyes. At times I stared at the car ceiling, counting my breaths. I didn't think about Marcus. I thought about the door that had just closed. I thought about how some boundaries are only drawn when it's already too late. Near dawn, I got out of the car. A thin layer of frost covered the windshield. I stood in front of the house that no longer carried my name. I placed my hand on the wooden door. A brief touch. No knocking, no calling out. I turned away. In the morning, I went to the sheriff's office. I brought the final set of papers. Copies Lorraine had left behind. Notes, audio files organized by date. I placed them on the desk. The investigator looked at me, then at the documents. He asked a few short questions. I answered. I signed the confirmation. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive through words. When I left the station, it was fully daylight. I knew I would lose many things. The house, my peace, a few relationships. But there was one thing I no longer lost. The right to stand inside my own life, That afternoon, my phone vibrated. The investigator's voice on the other end was clear. "The file is complete. An arrest warrant is being prepared." I said, "Thank you." I ended the call and looked out over the water. The wind was still blowing, and this time I didn't lower my head. The morning Marcus was arrested, it didn't rain. There was no thunder, no strong wind. Everything unfolded under a pale, even light, as if the day had been born, not to testify for anyone. I wasn't in the distant parking lot anymore. I stood at the start of the road leading to the house, only a few dozen steps from the front porch. I had arrived before them. I wanted to be there when it began. The sheriff's car pulled in without a siren. Tires crunched lightly on gravel. 2 deputies stepped out and spoke briefly with Marcus right at the door. He was still wearing the gray jacket I had bought him last winter when they asked him to turn around. Marcus complied immediately. No arguing. No questions. He only paused slightly when the cold cuffs touched his wrists. In that moment, he looked around like someone who had just lost their balance and was searching for something familiar to grab onto. And then he saw me. I didn't step forward right away. I let him look long enough to be sure he wasn't mistaken. Marcus's gaze fixed, then tightened. Not panic, recognition, late recognition. The kind that comes when you realize the room you thought was locked has had someone standing inside it all along. I took 1 step forward. Just one. Enough to stand level with the porch. Marcus stared at me, his hands cuffed in front of him. His shoulders sagged slightly, almost imperceptibly. I had never seen that posture on him. Not when borrowing money. Not when lying. Not when clearing things out of my house. This was the first time. "Pops," he said. Just one word. Nothing after it. I didn't answer right away. I took a small key from my coat pocket. Loren's safe key. I turned it slowly in my hand, letting the metal catch the light. Marcus saw it. I knew he did because his eyes dropped immediately. "You're very good at observing," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "But you forgot one thing." Marcus swallowed. The 2 deputies stood still, not intervening. This wasn't their part. "There are people," I continued, "who also observe. Longer than you think." I didn't say Laurent's name. I didn't have to. He knew. Marcus's eyes flickered. A very small, very real reflex. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then stopped. There were no words left that fit. Charlene stood by her car a few steps away. She had watched the scene from the beginning. When Marcus's eyes flicked toward her, searching, Charlene didn't turn away, but she didn't step forward either. She stood still, hands clenched together as if holding herself in the right place. I took another step, close enough that Marcus couldn't avoid my gaze. "I didn't come to win," I said. "I came to take my name back." Marcus looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. A small, rigid nod, like someone accepting something irreversible. No apology. No resentment. Just the end of a game he thought he controlled. The deputies signaled. Marcus was led away. As he passed me, he stopped for half a second, just long enough to whisper, "When did you know?" I looked straight into his eyes. "From the moment you thought I was already dead." I don't know if that hurt him. I only know it was the truth. The sheriff's car door closed. No siren. No dramatic clatter of metal. Just the engine starting and rolling away down the familiar road. The house stood there, silent as if it had never changed hands. Charlene stayed a few seconds longer. She looked at me, her expression complex but unreadable. I nodded to her. Not forgiveness. Just acknowledgement that she had been there, had witnessed it, and that was enough. When Charlene left, I stood alone in front of the porch. This time, I wasn't shaking. That afternoon, I was called in to sign papers. The house was returned to me on paper. Ownership restored. The bank sent confirmation. Everything followed procedure. Clean and orderly. No one apologized. Justice isn't loud. I opened the door and stepped into the house as dusk settled. No one was there. None of Marcus's things. No sounds. The living room felt emptier than I remembered. Loren's armchair was gone. The bookshelf was half bare. On the floor were faint marks where furniture had once stood. Lighter rectangles. I stood in the middle of the room and didn't sit right away. I slowly turned, looking at each corner. I pulled out a chair and sat in the center of the living room. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't turn on the main lights. Only the small lamp in the corner cast a weak yellow glow. I rested my hands on my knees, feeling the cold rise from the wooden floor dot the moment stretched. I didn't count time. I let it pass. I hadn't won completely. The house returned, but hollow. The family didn't come back with it. I had my name on the papers again, but I had lost shared dinners, unnecessary questions, even the silences that once protected us. That was the cost. I stood and went upstairs. The bedroom was empty. The closet held only a few hangers. I opened a drawer and found a small key. The metal box key. I took it downstairs, opened the box. I took out Lorraine's letter and placed it on the table. I reread a short passage, then folded it. There was a very clear moment when I understood that I was no longer the person I used to be. The old me would have tried to fill the house immediately, would have made phone calls, would have looked for ways to reconnect. The old me would have asked, "What if?" I didn't do that. I cleaned slowly, kept what needed to be kept, let go of what no longer had a place. I chose silence. That night, I opened the window and looked out over the water. The wind was light. The surface was flat. I stood there longer than usual. I wasn't waiting for anything to return. I accepted what was there. A quiet house. A name no longer erased. And a man who had crossed a line that couldn't be reversed. When I turned off the lights, the house no longer felt unfamiliar. It was just different. And so was I not long after I returned to the house. The final court hearing took place. It moved faster than I expected. Not because there was a lack of evidence, but because everything was clear enough that there was no need for long arguments. I sat in the back row. Not too close, not too far. I didn't want to look at Marcus for too long, but I didn't avoid him either. He stood before the judge with a straight posture, his hands resting in front of his stomach. No shaking. No bowed head. When the prosecutor read out the list of charges: financial fraud, falsifying records, misappropriation of assets through power of attorney, he only nodded slightly, as if listening to the outcome of a meeting. When asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Marcus was silent for a few seconds. I waited. The whole room waited. "I did what I thought was right," he said. He didn't look at me. He didn't apologize. He didn't add any justification. Just one sentence. Enough to close whatever hope remained. The sentence was handed down. Not severe enough to be called destruction, but long enough not to be taken lightly. When the gavel came down, the sound was dry and final. I didn't feel relief. I felt an ending. And that ending came without any explanation for what was left behind. Charlene didn't stay after the hearing. I saw her standing in the hallway, wearing a thin coat, holding her car keys. We looked at each other from a distance. She gave a very slight nod. The nod of someone who knew she had stood in the wrong place, but was fortunate enough to stop in time. I returned the look in the same way. No words were spoken, and none were needed. Her back disappeared behind the large glass doors of the courthouse. carrying with it the last remnants of what I once tried to build and call family. I went back to the house in the days that followed with a decision already formed. I cleaned each room, unhurried. I sorted my belongings into 3 piles. Keep, give away. Discard. The things I kept were fewer than I expected. One kept a few books, my old armchair, and Loren's metal box. That metal box was the only thing connecting me to a past I still valued. What about you? Is there a keepsake from someone long gone, or an old object you refuse to throw away, no matter where you move? If there is, tell me about it. Sometimes what we keep isn't an object, but a piece of memory. I sold the house after the paperwork was completed. Not because I needed the money, but because I no longer needed a space that large for a life that had changed its rhythm. On the day the buyers came to sign, I walked through the living room one last time. In the corner, the grandfather clock on the wall was still running, steady, patient. I stood in front of it and opened the back panel. I removed the battery and placed it in my palm. The second hand stopped. No sound. I closed the panel and hung it back. The clock stood still, like a period at the end of a sentence. I moved into a smaller apartment near a library and a park. I lived smaller, fewer things, less noise, fewer appointments. I walked every morning, bought coffee at a familiar cafe. I learned not to explain myself to strangers, and not to need their understanding. Some evenings I opened Laurent's letter, read a short passage, and put it away. I held no resentment. I didn't offer forgiveness either. Both require a kind of energy I no longer wanted to spend. The new boundary was simple. I kept my name, kept my right to choose, and didn't hand them over again. Everything else, family, the past, unanswered questions, I left where they belonged. When I turned off the lights each night, the room was quiet. And in that quiet, I stood upright. I moved to my new place on a very ordinary morning. No one asked where I came from. No one needed to know who I had been. The small apartment sat near a library and a park full of old oak trees. Every morning I walked past it, bought a cup of coffee at the corner shop, then sat by the window and read a few pages. That was enough. Here, no one knew I once had a house by the water. No one knew my name had appeared in records I never wanted to open again. And I had no need to tell the story. My new life didn't require explanations. In the early days, the quiet made me feel unsteady. But then I realized quiet isn't emptiness. It's space. Space to breathe at my own pace. To no longer hesitate each time I signed my name or wonder whether my kindness was being used by someone else. Some afternoons, sunlight slanted through the trees in the park as I sat on a wooden bench and watched people pass by. No one knew me, and for the first time in a long while, that made me feel safe. I took my name back. But I also learned that sometimes the price of justice is the silence that follows. I hold no bitterness. I don't try to forget. I simply put everything in its proper place and move on. If there's one thing I keep for myself after all of this, it's this. Boundaries don't push people farther apart. They only prevent us from disappearing into someone else's life. If you're listening to this story in a quiet moment of your own, tell me where you are or what stage of life you're in. One comment is enough. If this story touched you, please like it. If you think someone out there needs to hear it, share it. And if you want to stay with stories that are slow, honest, and respectful to the listener, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This video was supported by AI and edited and refined by humans to offer reflection and human value. It does not encourage imitation. Thank you for staying until the end. I'm still here. Thank you for being here and letting me share my story. If it touched you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment telling me what city and state you're watching from. I love knowing where you all are. If you want to support me even more, there's a donation link in the description. I share real-life stories like this every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular videos will appear on your screen. Choose whichever one calls to you. Until next time, remember, your story isn't over just because someone tried to write the ending without you.